The wind slammed against the shop window so hard that Elena Voss dropped the cloth she was holding. Her heart jumped into her throat before she even understood why. Something in the room had changed. The old Nutcracker on her workbench, the one she had kept since her grandmother passed away, was glowing faintly at the base, a soft amber light pulsing like a heartbeat trapped inside the wood. She stood frozen, staring at it, her breath fogging in the sudden cold that had crept into the small workshop despite the heater running behind her. Outside, the storm that had been building all evening cracked with thunder, and for one impossible second, she was certain she heard something breathe. Elena had always been the strange one in town. She restored antiques for a living, working quietly in the back room of a shop that smelled of varnish and old paper, and she had never once brought a boyfriend home, never gone on more than a handful of awkward dates that ended with her checking her watch. Instead, she came home every night to an old wooden doll with a painted face and a stiff wooden jaw, and she talked to it the way other people talk to their pets or their houseplants. It started as a joke, a habit she picked up as a lonely teenager who missed her grandmother too much to let go of the last thing she had given her. But over the years, it had become something else, something she never quite admitted out loud. She trusted that doll more than she trusted most people. It never judged her, never left, never lied. Her cousin Mara loved to tease her about it. Just last week, over coffee at the little cafe on Main Street, Mara had rolled her eyes and said, "Everyone in town calls you the Nutcracker bride. You know that, right?" Elena had laughed along, because what else could she do, but the words had stung more than she let on. She had grown used to being the punchline, used to the pitying looks from the women at church, the smirks from men who thought she was odd, the whispered jokes that followed her like a shadow through the narrow streets of her small hometown. None of that mattered tonight, though, because the Nutcracker on her workbench was glowing, and she was almost certain the wood beneath the paint was moving. She took a step back, bumping into the shelf behind her, and a jar of old brass hinges clattered to the floor. The sound seemed to echo far longer than it should have. Elena pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing, telling herself it was just static electricity from the storm, or a trick of the eclipse she had read about that morning, the rare kind that only happened once every few decades. But then the wood cracked. Not shattered, not exploded, but split slowly down the middle, like a seed opening after a long winter. Elena gasped and stumbled further back, her shoulder blades pressing hard against the cold brick wall. The painted face of the doll fell away in pieces, revealing something underneath that made absolutely no sense. Skin, human skin, pale in the dim light, stretched over what looked like the curve of a shoulder. She should have run. Later, she would tell herself that 1,000 times, that any sensible person would have bolted out the door and called someone, anyone, for help. But Elena did not run. She stood there, gripping the edge of her workbench so tightly her knuckles went white, and she watched as the wooden shell continued to fall away, piece by piece, until a man knelt where the Nutcracker had been. He was not gentle in his arrival. His body convulsed, as if waking from a long sleep that had trapped every muscle in place. He gasped a breath that sounded like it had been held for centuries, and the sound of it filled the small room with something raw and desperate. Elena watched, unable to look away, as he pressed his palms flat against the workbench and pushed himself upright, his dark hair falling across a face that was, despite the chaos of the moment, strikingly handsome. His eyes opened, and Elena's breath caught. They were amber, a deep golden color that seemed to catch the low light of the shop and throw it back brighter than it should have been. They were not the eyes of an ordinary man. There was something ancient in them, something wild, something that made the small hairs on her arms rise even before he spoke a single word. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The storm outside continued to rage, thunder rolling low across the sky, rain hammering against the glass. Inside, the silence between them stretched taut, filled only with the sound of his ragged breathing slowly evening out. "I am sorry," he finally said, his voice deep and rough, like it had not been used in a very long time. I did not mean to frighten you. Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She tried again. Who? She managed, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you? The man, still kneeling amid broken pieces of painted wood, looked down at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time in years. He flexed his fingers slowly, studying the way they moved, the way blood seemed to rush back into muscles that had been still for far too long. My name is Cade, he said, and I have been trapped in that wood for longer than you can imagine. Elena's mind raced through every explanation that made even a little bit of sense. A dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. Some elaborate trick that Mara had arranged as one final joke about the Nutcracker bride. But none of it fit. The cold air, the scent of pine and something wilder underneath it. The way his eyes tracked her every movement like she was the only steady thing in a world that had shifted beneath him. You were a doll, she said slowly, testing the words. I have had you for years. My grandmother gave you to me. Something flickered across Cade's face, an emotion Elena could not quite name. Sorrow, maybe, or gratitude, or both at once. I felt her kindness, he said quietly. Even trapped as I was, I felt every hand that touched me with care. Yours more than anyone else's. Elena's chest tightened. She thought of all the nights she had sat with that Nutcracker on her lap, talking through her worries, her fears, the quiet ache of being different in a town that rewarded sameness. She had always assumed she was talking to herself, working through her own thoughts out loud. The idea that someone, something, had been listening the entire time made her knees feel unsteady. I do not understand any of this, she admitted, sinking slowly into the old wooden chair beside her workbench. Please, explain it to me. All of it. Cade rose to his feet, moving carefully, as if relearning the simple mechanics of standing upright. He was tall, taller than she had expected, with broad shoulders and a build that suggested strength even beneath his obvious exhaustion. He wore no shirt, only simple trousers that looked as though they, too, had been carved from the same ancient wood before shifting into fabric alongside him. Centuries ago, he began, I was born into a pack, a family of shifters who ruled over lands far from here. I was meant to become their alpha, their leader, when my time came. But there were those within my own bloodline who wanted power sooner than fate intended to give it to them. Shifters, Elena repeated faintly, as in, wolves. Cade nodded once. My cousin arranged a union for me, a mating meant to secure his own influence over the pack through me. When I refused it, he turned to dark magic to remove me from his path entirely. He cursed me into wood, bound me there until someone loved me without expecting anything in return. A love with no conditions, no demands. He believed such a thing to be impossible to find. Elena sat very still, absorbing the story piece by piece. It should have sounded insane. It should have sent her running for the door, screaming for anyone who might believe such madness. But sitting there, looking into those impossible amber eyes, she felt something settle inside her chest instead, a strange and quiet certainty that every word was true. And tonight, she said slowly, during the eclipse, tonight, the barrier weakened enough for your care to finally break through. Cade finished for her. Years of it, Elena. Not one single night, but years of unconditional kindness, poured into a doll you had every reason to eventually forget. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she could not have explained exactly why. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was the overwhelming realization that all those years of being mocked, all those whispered jokes about the Nutcracker bride, had led to this single moment, proof that her heart had not been foolish after all. I do not know what to do now, she admitted. This does not happen. Things like this are not real. Cade took a slow step toward her, careful, as though he understood how fragile this moment truly was. And yet here I stand, he said gently, breathing, alive, because of you. The storm outside began to ease, the thunder growing distant, the rain softening into a steady patter against the glass. Elena studied the man before her, still trying to reconcile the impossible shift from painted wood to living flesh, still trying to understand how her quiet, lonely evenings had somehow led her here. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "To you, to your pack." Cade's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the warmth in his expression gave way to something harder, something guarded. "My pack has been without a true leader since the day I disappeared," he said. "My cousin has likely spent these centuries consolidating power, twisting loyalty through fear rather than respect. If word reaches him that I have returned, he will not simply let that happen without a fight." A chill ran through Elena that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "Is that dangerous?" she asked. "For you. For me." Cade met her gaze steadily, and there was something protective in the way his expression shifted, something fierce and immediate that made her stomach flutter despite the fear coursing through her. "I will not allow anything to happen to you," he said, his voice low and certain. "You freed me when no one else could. I owe you a debt I intend to honor fully." Elena did not know what to say to that. She sat quietly for a long moment, listening to the fading storm, looking at the broken pieces of painted wood scattered across her workbench, remnants of the only companion she had trusted for years. It was strange to feel a sense of loss for something that had simply transformed into someone far more real. "Will you stay?" she finally asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Here, in this town, at least for a little while." Cade's expression softened, and for the briefest moment, Elena caught a glimpse of the man he might have been before centuries of imprisonment hardened something inside him. "If you will have me," he said quietly, "then yes, I will stay." Elena nodded slowly, still trying to process the sheer impossibility of everything unfolding around her. Outside, the clouds began to part, revealing a sliver of moonlight that spilled through the workshop window, illuminating the space between them. She thought of every mocking comment she had endured over the years, every joke about loving a piece of carved wood more than any real person. She thought of how wrong they had all been. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring 1,000 new complications. Questions from Mara, curious glances from neighbors who would surely notice a strange, striking man suddenly living beside the quiet antique restorer everyone loved to mock. But tonight, sitting in the dim light of her small workshop, Elena allowed herself a single moment of quiet wonder, a feeling she had almost forgotten how to hold. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not alone. Cade extended a hand toward her, an offer rather than a demand, patient despite the urgency Elena sensed simmering beneath his calm exterior. She hesitated only a moment before placing her palm against his, feeling the warmth of living skin where cold, lifeless wood had been for as long as she had known him. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "we will face it together." Elena believed him, and somewhere beneath the fear and the disbelief and the overwhelming strangeness of the night, a small, steady flame of hope began to burn inside her, one she had not felt in a very long time. Outside, the last rumble of thunder faded into silence, and the town of quiet whispers and unkind jokes slept on, completely unaware that everything within it was about to change. Morning light spilled across the workshop floor, catching on broken pieces of painted wood still scattered near the workbench. Elena had not slept. She sat wrapped in a blanket on the small couch near the back wall, watching Cade as he moved through the space with the careful, curious steps of someone relearning a world he had not touched in centuries. He picked up a small brass clock, turning it over in his hands, studying the mechanism with quiet fascination. "Everything is different," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "The last time I stood in a room like this, there was no glass this clear, no light that came without flame." Elena pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, still trying to convince herself that the previous night had actually happened. "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long were you trapped?" Cade set the clock down gently and turned to face her, his expression unreadable for a moment before settling into something more open. "Centuries," he admitted. Long enough that the world you know is nothing like the one I remember. Long enough that everyone I once called family is either long buried or transformed by time into something I may not recognize at all. The weight of that settled heavily in the small room. Elena thought about her own losses, her grandmother, the quiet ache of growing up without parents who stayed, and she felt an unexpected kinship with the man standing before her, despite everything impossible about their situation. "I should probably call in sick to the shop today," she said, glancing toward the front counter where her tools and half-finished restoration projects waited. "I do not think I can pretend today is a normal day." Cade's gaze sharpened slightly. "Is it safe," he asked, "for others to see me here?" Elena considered the question carefully. "Our town is small," she admitted. "People notice everything. If you are suddenly living with me, there will be questions, a lot of them. Then perhaps," Cade said slowly, "we should have answers ready before those questions arrive." They spent the next several hours devising a story simple enough to satisfy curious neighbors without inviting too much scrutiny. Cade would be a distant relative, visiting from out of town, staying with Elena temporarily while he settled into the area. It was not entirely convincing, but it was better than the truth, and Elena doubted anyone would push too hard against the explanation. Not when gossip about her love for a nutcracker had already made her an easy target for jokes, rather than genuine curiosity. By mid-afternoon, hunger finally pulled them both toward the small kitchen at the back of the shop. Elena found herself watching Cade with quiet amusement as he studied a simple sandwich, like it was some grand mystery to be solved. "You eat with your hands," he observed, turning the bread over curiously. Elena laughed despite herself, the sound surprising her with how easily it came. "Most of the time, yes," she said. "Things have gotten a lot more casual since your time, apparently." Cade's mouth curved into the faintest hint of a smile, and Elena felt something warm bloom in her chest at the sight of it. Despite the impossible circumstances surrounding his arrival, there was something remarkably human about the way he adjusted to each small discovery, patient and thoughtful rather than overwhelmed. Their quiet afternoon was interrupted by the sharp chime of the shop bell out front, followed immediately by Mara's familiar voice calling out a cheerful greeting. Elena's stomach dropped. "Stay here," she whispered urgently to Cade, gesturing toward the back room before hurrying out to meet her cousin. Mara stood near the front counter, scrolling through her phone, her dark hair pulled into its usual messy bun. She glanced up as Elena approached, offering a teasing grin. "There she is, the Nutcracker bride herself. I brought coffee as a peace offering for teasing you so much yesterday." Elena forced a smile, accepting the paper cup with hands that trembled slightly. "Thanks," she managed. "You did not have to do that." Mara studied her for a long moment, her teasing expression slowly shifting into something more concerned. "You look exhausted," she said. "Did something happen? You are acting strange." "Just a long night," Elena said quickly. "Trouble sleeping." Before Mara could press further, a soft sound came from the back room, followed by Cade's low voice muttering something about the unfamiliar workings of a refrigerator. Mara's eyebrows shot upward, her gaze darting toward the doorway behind Elena. "Is someone back there?" Mara asked, her teasing smile returning with new energy. "Elena Voss, do you have a man hiding in your workshop?" Elena's face flushed instantly. "He is a relative," she said quickly. "Visiting from out of town, staying with me for a little while." Mara did not look remotely convinced, but before she could interrogate the matter further, Cade stepped into the doorway, drawn by the sound of unfamiliar voices. Mara's jaw actually dropped. Elena watched her cousin's expression shift from disbelief to something closer to shock as she took in the sight of Cade. Tall, striking, undeniably handsome despite his slightly rumpled appearance. Mara turned back toward Elena with wide eyes, mouthing the word relative with obvious skepticism. "This is Cade," Elena said, gesturing awkwardly between them. "Cade, this is my cousin Mara." Cade offered a polite nod, his expression carefully composed despite the unfamiliar social situation. "It is a pleasure to meet you." he said, his deep voice carrying an old-fashioned formality that only seemed to intrigue Mara further. A very distant relative, apparently, Mara said dryly, arching an eyebrow at Elena. We should catch up properly sometime soon, cousin. I have questions. After Mara finally left, promising to return with more coffee and considerably more curiosity, Elena sank against the front counter with a long exhale. That went about as well as it could have, she admitted. Cade moved closer, studying her tired expression with quiet concern. You seem troubled, he said. Is it the deception that bothers you, or something else? Elena considered the question honestly. Both, she admitted. I have spent years being the person everyone laughs at behind closed doors. Now I am lying to my own cousin about the most important thing that has ever happened to me. It feels wrong, even though I understand why we have to do it. Cade's expression softened, and he reached out, his hand hovering near hers, hesitant, as though unsure whether the gesture would be welcome. When Elena did not pull away, his fingers closed gently around hers. You spent years showing kindness to something the rest of the world dismissed as foolish, he said quietly. That kindness broke a curse that powerful magic could not undo alone. Whatever else happens, that truth belongs entirely to you, regardless of what anyone else believes. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes again, though this time they came from something closer to relief than fear. Thank you, she whispered. As evening settled over the small town, Elena found herself sitting across from Cade at her tiny kitchen table, sharing a simple dinner while he continued asking careful questions about the modern world around him. Despite the fear still coiled tightly in her chest, despite the uncertainty of what his cursed past might mean for both their futures, Elena found herself laughing more freely than she had in years. But even as warmth settled over their quiet evening, a subtle unease lingered beneath the surface. Several times throughout the day, Cade had paused near the windows, his expression sharpening as though listening for something Elena could not hear. She noticed it again as darkness fell outside, his gaze drifting toward the tree line beyond her small backyard, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Is something wrong? She finally asked, unable to ignore the shift in his demeanor any longer. Cade hesitated before answering, his amber eyes reflecting the dim kitchen light. I sense something, he admitted slowly, a presence I have not felt in a very long time. It is faint, but it is there. Elena's pulse quickened. What kind of presence? She asked carefully. Cade's expression turned grave. My cousin has spies scattered across many territories, he said. If even one of them senses that the curse has broken, word will travel quickly. I fear our quiet evening may not last much longer. A chill swept through the small kitchen despite the warmth of the stove still radiating nearby. Elena glanced toward the darkened windows, suddenly acutely aware of how isolated her little shop truly was at the edge of town, surrounded by quiet streets and thick trees that had always felt comforting rather than threatening. What do we do? She asked quietly. Cade reached across the table, his hand closing gently around hers once more. For tonight, we remain cautious, he said. But know this, Elena. Whatever comes for us, I will not allow it to take what we have only just begun to build. Elena nodded slowly, trying to steady the anxious flutter in her chest. Outside, the wind picked up once more, rustling through the trees surrounding her small home, carrying with it a faint, distant howl that sent a shiver down her spine. Neither of them spoke of it again that night, but neither of them slept easily either, both aware that the quiet peace of their first full day together was likely the calm before something far larger began to stir. 3 days passed in a strange, careful rhythm. Elena reopened her shop, greeting customers with the same steady smile she always wore, while Cade remained mostly out of sight, learning everything he could about the modern world from the small collection of books stacked in the back room. But the whispers Mara had started spread quickly, the way they always did in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business before they even had a chance to explain it themselves. By the end of the week, Half the town seemed to know that Elena Voss had a mysterious, striking man living with her, and the same people who once mocked her for talking to a wooden doll now found an entirely new reason to gossip. Elena heard the murmurs everywhere she went, at the grocery store, outside the post office, even from the elderly women who gathered on the church steps every Sunday morning. Some stray she picked up somewhere, one of the older gossips muttered loud enough for Elena to hear as she passed by one afternoon. Odd girl always did attract strange things. Elena kept her chin high and her steps steady, refusing to let the comment sting the way it once might have. She had far bigger concerns weighing on her mind than small-town gossip, though she could not deny a small, satisfied thrill at imagining what those same gossiping women might say if they ever learned the truth. That evening, as she walked the short distance back to her shop after closing, a sudden prickling sensation crawled across the back of her neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. She quickened her pace instinctively, glancing over her shoulder toward the quiet, empty street behind her. Nothing. Just shadows stretching long beneath the setting sun and the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle evening breeze. Still, the unease refused to fade, and Elena found herself nearly running the last block toward home. Cade met her at the door before she even reached it, his expression tense, his amber eyes scanning the street behind her with obvious concern. "You felt it too," he said, not a question. Elena nodded, breathless. "Someone was watching me," she admitted. "I could not see anyone, but I felt it." Cade's jaw tightened, and he stepped past her, moving toward the street with careful, deliberate steps, his senses clearly stretched far beyond what Elena's own could perceive. After several long moments, he returned, his expression grim. "They have found us," he said quietly. "I can smell them, faint, but unmistakable. Scouts from my cousin's pack." Elena's stomach twisted into a tight, anxious knot. "What does that mean?" she asked. "What will they do?" "For now, likely nothing more than observe," Cade said, though the tension in his voice suggested he was not entirely convinced by his own reassurance. "They will confirm that I am truly free of the curse before making any further moves, but it will not be long before my cousin himself learns the truth." That night, sleep proved impossible for either of them. Elena sat curled on the small couch, wrapped in a blanket, while Cade paced slowly near the darkened windows, his enhanced senses clearly straining against the quiet of the night. Around midnight, a soft knock sounded at the back door, and Elena's heart nearly stopped. Cade moved immediately, positioning himself protectively between Elena and the entrance. "Stay behind me," he murmured, his voice low and steady despite the obvious tension coiled through his frame. The knock came again, softer this time. Cade approached slowly, his body coiled and ready, before finally opening the door just enough to reveal who stood on the other side. To Elena's surprise, it was not some menacing stranger, but a young woman with pale hair and cautious, watchful eyes, dressed simply enough that she almost looked ordinary despite the clear tension radiating from her posture. "I mean no harm," the woman said quickly, holding both hands slightly raised. "My name is Ivy. I am part of your former pack, sent to observe, not to attack." Cade studied her carefully for a long moment before stepping back slightly, allowing her into the small entryway, though his protective stance near Elena never wavered. "Speak quickly," he said. "Why have you come?" Ivy's gaze flickered nervously toward Elena before returning to Cade. "Word has already reached your cousin Silas," she admitted. "He knows the curse has broken. He is gathering forces even now, preparing to ensure you never reach the Packlands to reclaim what should rightfully be yours." Elena felt her blood run cold at the mention of the name Silas, the cousin responsible for cursing Cade in the first place. Cade's expression darkened considerably, his shoulders squaring with quiet, controlled fury. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "Days, perhaps," Ivy said. "No more than that. Many within the pack still remember you fondly, Cade. Many would welcome your return as their rightful alpha. But Silas has spent centuries building loyalty through fear rather than respect. Those who might support you will need reassurance that you are strong enough to protect them from his retaliation. Elena listened, her mind racing through the implications of everything unfolding around her. This was no longer simply a matter of hiding Cade from curious neighbors and small-town gossip. This was something far larger, a battle for leadership that stretched back centuries, one that could put both their lives directly in danger. "Why are you helping us?" Cade finally asked, studying Ivy carefully. Ivy's expression turned solemn. "My family was loyal to yours long before Silas seized control," she said quietly. "I was a child when you vanished, but my parents spoke of you often, of the fair and steady leader you would have become. I do not wish to see Silas continue ruling through cruelty when a better path still remains possible." Cade nodded slowly, seeming to accept her sincerity. "Then help us understand what we are facing," he said. "Tell us everything." Over the next hour, Ivy explained the current state of the pack in careful detail. Silas ruled with an iron grip, maintaining power through intimidation rather than genuine loyalty. Many pack members lived in quiet fear, unable to challenge his authority without risking severe punishment. Cade's return represented a genuine threat to that control, and Silas would not allow it to go unanswered. "There is also the matter of the mate bond," Ivy added carefully, glancing between Cade and Elena with obvious curiosity. "The old laws state that any alpha seeking to reclaim leadership after such a long absence must present a true and verified mate bond before the pack elders. It is meant to ensure stability, proof that the returning alpha carries a foundation strong enough to guide the pack forward." Elena's breath caught. "Me?" she asked quietly. "I would need to be involved in that somehow." Ivy nodded. "The elders will need to witness the bond directly," she confirmed. "It will not be simple, and it will not be without danger, especially with Silas working against you at every turn. But it is the surest path toward reclaiming what is rightfully yours, Cade." The weight of everything settled heavily over the small room. Elena had spent her entire life feeling like an outsider in her own quiet town, mocked for loving something no one else understood. Now she found herself thrust into the middle of an ancient power struggle within a world she had not even known existed until a few short days ago. "Are you certain you wish to walk this path?" Cade asked her quietly, once Ivy had finally taken her leave, promising to return with further news soon. "This danger extends far beyond anything you signed up for when you simply cared for a broken, cursed doll." Elena considered the question honestly, weighing the fear coiled tightly in her chest against the strange, steady certainty that had settled over her the moment Cade first opened his eyes. "I did not choose this by accident," she finally said. "Something in me recognized you long before either of us understood why. I am not walking away now, not when everything is finally starting to make sense." Cade's expression softened, gratitude and something deeper flickering behind his amber eyes. "Then we face what comes next together," he said quietly. Outside, the wind stirred once more through the trees surrounding Elena's quiet home, carrying with it the faint, distant scent of danger drawing steadily closer with each passing day. 2 days after Ivy's visit, a black car rolled slowly down Elena's quiet street, parking directly in front of her shop despite the closed sign hanging in the window. Elena watched from behind the curtains, her stomach tightening as 3 unfamiliar figures stepped out, moving with the same predatory grace she had come to recognize in Cade whenever his guard dropped even slightly. "They are not here to talk," Cade said grimly, moving to stand beside her at the window. "I recognize the tallest one. His name is Grant. He served as Silas's enforcer even in my time." Elena's pulse raced. "What do we do?" she asked. Cade's jaw tightened with quiet resolve. "We do not run," he said. "Running only confirms weakness, and weakness invites further attacks. We meet them directly, but carefully." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she followed Cade toward the front door, though she forced herself to steady her breathing, drawing strength from the calm confidence radiating from him despite the obvious danger. When Cade opened the door, the tallest of the 3 men, broad-shouldered with cold, calculating eyes, offered a thin smile that held no real warmth. "Cade," he said, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "It has been a very long time." "Grant," Cade replied evenly. "I see Silas still sends others to do his work rather than facing me himself." Grant's smile tightened slightly. "Silas simply wished to confirm the rumors himself," he said. "It seems they are true. The great Alpha heir, freed at last, hiding away with a human woman in some quiet, forgotten little town." Elena felt the weight of his gaze shift toward her, cold and assessing, and she forced herself to stand tall despite the instinctive urge to shrink back. Cade's posture shifted subtly, placing himself slightly in front of her without appearing overtly protective, a careful balance between caution and diplomacy. "You may return to Silas with confirmation, then," Cade said calmly. "I intend to reclaim what is rightfully mine, and no amount of intimidation will change that." Grant's expression darkened slightly, though he maintained his composed demeanor. "Silas expected as much," he said. "He wished me to deliver a message. The elders will hold council in 7 days' time. Should you wish to present your claim, you are welcome to do so. But know this, Cade. Silas will not relinquish control without a fight, and he has spent centuries preparing for this exact possibility." With that, Grant and his companions returned to their vehicle without further explanation, disappearing down the quiet street as quickly as they had arrived. Elena released a breath she had not realized she was holding, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. "That went better than I feared," she admitted. Cade's expression remained tense despite her cautious optimism. "It went exactly as Silas intended," he said grimly. "He wants me to walk directly into a formal challenge, one where he has had centuries to prepare every advantage in his favor." Elena's stomach twisted with fresh anxiety. "Then what do we do?" she asked. "Do we refuse?" Cade shook his head slowly. "Refusing would mean abandoning the pack entirely to his cruelty," he said. "I cannot allow that, not when so many innocent members suffer under his rule simply because they lack the strength to challenge him directly. We must prepare, Elena, quickly and carefully." Over the following days, Ivy returned several times, bringing news from within the pack alongside careful guidance on the traditions and expectations surrounding the Elders' Council. Elena found herself thrust into an accelerated education on pack customs, mate bonds, and the delicate political maneuvering required to survive what was clearly shaping into a dangerous confrontation. "You must understand," Ivy explained one evening, seated across from Elena at the small kitchen table, while Cade trained in the backyard, sharpening reflexes that had lain dormant for centuries. "The elders value strength, but they value wisdom and loyalty just as highly. Silas has strength, certainly, but he has ruled through fear rather than genuine respect. If you and Cade can demonstrate a bond built on something far more powerful than mere force, it may sway several elders who have long grown weary of Silas's cruelty." Elena absorbed every word carefully, though the weight of responsibility settled heavily across her shoulders. "I am just an ordinary woman," she admitted quietly. "I do not know the first thing about pack politics or ancient traditions. What if I fail him?" Ivy's expression softened with unexpected warmth. "You already succeeded where centuries of dark magic could not," she said gently. "You broke an unbreakable curse simply through genuine, unconditional care. That is not ordinary at all, Elena. That is precisely the kind of strength the elders will recognize, if given the chance to witness it clearly." Meanwhile, Mara continued pressing Elena for answers regarding her mysterious house guest, though Elena managed to deflect most questions with vague explanations about family complications. Still, her cousin's sharp instincts sensed something larger unfolding, and one evening, she showed up unannounced at the shop, refusing to leave until Elena provided some measure of honesty. "Something is going on," Mara said firmly, arms crossed as she stood in the small kitchen doorway. "I have known you my entire life, Elena. You do not lie well, and you have been lying to me all week." Elena hesitated, glancing toward the backyard where Cade continued his careful training exercises. She weighed the risks of revealing even a small portion of the truth against the growing strain of maintaining an increasingly complicated deception. "It is complicated," she finally admitted. "More complicated than I can fully explain right now. But I promise you, Mara, I am not in danger from Cade. If anything, he is protecting me from something far more dangerous than anything you could imagine." Mara studied her carefully, clearly unsatisfied, but recognizing the sincerity behind Elena's words. "Whatever this is," she finally said, softer now, "I am still your cousin. If you need help, real help, you come to me. Understood?" Elena nodded, genuinely touched by the fierce loyalty beneath her cousin's teasing exterior. "Understood," she agreed. As the 7 days counted steadily downward, Elena found herself growing closer to Cade with each passing hour, their quiet conversations stretching late into the night as he shared fragments of his past, the family he had lost, the responsibilities he had never wanted but now felt compelled to reclaim. In turn, Elena shared her own quiet loneliness, the years spent feeling disconnected from a world that never quite understood her. "I used to think something was wrong with me," she admitted one evening, sitting beside Cade on the small back porch as stars scattered across the clear night sky above them. "Everyone else seemed to move through life so easily, forming connections, falling in love, building families. I just never felt that pull toward anyone, not until you." Cade reached over, gently taking her hand in his. "Perhaps you were simply waiting," he said quietly. "Some hearts recognize their match long before the rest of the world catches up to the truth." Elena felt warmth bloom through her chest despite the looming danger hanging over their future. "Whatever happens at the council," she said softly, "I am glad this happened. I am glad I never gave up on you, even when everyone else thought I was foolish for holding on." Cade lifted her hand gently, pressing a soft kiss against her knuckles, his amber eyes steady and warm beneath the moonlight. "I am endlessly grateful you did not," he murmured. As the final days before the council approached, Ivy delivered one last piece of unsettling news. "Silas has been gathering additional forces," she warned during her final visit before the council date. "He does not intend to rely solely on tradition to secure his position. Please, both of you, remain vigilant. He is far more dangerous than mere political maneuvering suggests." Elena felt the familiar chill of fear settle over her once more, though this time it was tempered by a steady resolve that had not existed within her before Cade's arrival. Whatever Silas intended, whatever dangers awaited them at the Packlands, Elena refused to back down now, not when she had finally found something worth fighting for. The night before their departure, Elena stood once more in her small workshop, staring at the scattered pieces of painted wood still resting in a small box on her workbench, the remnants of the Nutcracker that had brought Cade into her life. She picked up a single fragment, running her thumb gently across the faded paint. "Thank you," she whispered quietly to the empty room, though she somehow knew Cade, standing silently in the doorway behind her, understood exactly what she meant. Tomorrow, everything would change irreversibly, one way or another. But tonight, Elena allowed herself one final moment of quiet gratitude for the strange and impossible love that had found her in the most unexpected way imaginable. The journey to the Packlands took most of the day, winding through dense forests that grew steadily older and wilder the further they traveled from Elena's small town. Ivy accompanied them, guiding their small car along roads that seemed to exist on no map Elena had ever seen, until finally, as evening settled over the horizon, a massive estate emerged from the trees, ancient stone walls covered in creeping ivy, surrounded by towering pines that seemed to watch their arrival with quiet, ancient patience. "This is it," Ivy said softly as they approached the main gates. "The heart of the Packlands. It has not changed much since your time, Cade." Elena felt her stomach tighten with nervous anticipation as they stepped out of the car, the crisp forest air carrying scents she could not quite identify, earthy and wild, layered with something that felt distinctly alive in a way ordinary forests never did. Cade's posture shifted immediately upon stepping onto the grounds, straightening with quiet authority despite the obvious tension radiating from his frame. "Stay close to me," he murmured to Elena, "and remember everything Ivy has taught you. The elders will be watching closely." They were greeted at the entrance by a small gathering of pack members, some regarding Cade with obvious curiosity, others with open wariness. Word had clearly spread quickly of his return, and Elena could feel dozens of eyes tracking their every movement as they made their way toward the main hall where the council would soon convene. Inside, the hall stretched impressively upward, ancient wooden beams crossing high overhead, illuminated by soft lantern light that cast long shadows across the gathered crowd. At the far end, a raised platform held several elderly figures seated in ornate chairs, their expressions unreadable as Cade approached with Elena close beside him. "Cade, son of the old bloodline," one of the elders finally spoke, her voice carrying easily across the silent hall despite her frail appearance. "It has been many years since your presence graced these halls. We had long assumed you lost forever." "I was cursed, not lost," Cade replied evenly, his voice steady despite the weight of dozens of watchful eyes upon him. "Bound in wood through my cousin's treachery, freed only through unconditional love, precisely as the old laws require for such curses to break." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd at his words, and Elena felt the weight of sudden attention shift toward her as Cade gestured gently in her direction. "This is Elena Voss," he continued, "the woman whose care broke the curse that held me for centuries." Before the elders could respond, a commanding voice cut sharply through the hall, drawing every gaze toward the entrance where a tall, striking man strode forward with confident, deliberate steps. His resemblance to Cade was unmistakable, though his expression carried none of the warmth Elena had come to associate with him, only cold, calculated ambition. "Cousin," Silas said smoothly, though his eyes held nothing but venomous contempt. "How wonderful to see you finally free of your wooden prison. Though I must say, I expected a far more impressive rescuer than some ordinary human woman from a forgettable little town." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks at the deliberate insult, though she forced herself to remain composed, refusing to give Silas the satisfaction of an obvious reaction. Cade's expression darkened considerably, his hand tightening protectively around hers. "Careful, cousin," Cade warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You underestimate her at your own peril." Silas's mouth curved into a thin, mocking smile. "Do I?" he mused, turning his attention deliberately toward the assembled elders. "Esteemed elders, before we proceed further with this reunion, allow me to remind everyone present of the sacred laws governing such claims. A returning alpha must present proof of a true mate bond, verified directly by council witness, before any leadership may be restored." The eldest elder nodded slowly. "This is indeed the law," she confirmed. "Cade, are you prepared to present such proof before this council?" Elena's heart pounded fiercely as Cade turned toward her, his amber eyes steady and warm despite the tension thick within the hall. He reached for both her hands, holding them gently as he addressed the elders directly. "I am," he said firmly. "Elena Voss holds my heart as fully and completely as any mate bond could ever require. Her love broke a curse that dark magic itself could not undo. I trust the council to recognize the truth in that." The elders exchanged quiet glances among themselves before the eldest spoke once more. "Words alone, however sincere, are not sufficient proof," she said carefully. "The bond must be demonstrated through the old rites, a ceremony requiring both parties to willingly complete the sacred binding before witnesses." Silas's smile widened with obvious satisfaction. "How convenient," he said mockingly. "A human woman, completely unfamiliar with our customs, expected to complete an ancient binding ceremony under immense pressure. I wonder how confident my dear cousin truly is in this supposed unconditional love." Elena felt anger flare unexpectedly through her chest, cutting sharply through her earlier nervousness. She squeezed Cade's hands firmly, drawing his attention before addressing the elders directly herself, her voice steadier than she expected. "I do not know your customs," she admitted honestly, "but I know what I feel, and I am not afraid to prove it, regardless of how unfamiliar or difficult the ceremony may be." A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the gathered crowd at her bold declaration. The eldest elder studied Elena carefully for a long moment, before finally nodding with quiet approval. "Very well," she said. "The binding ceremony will take place tomorrow evening, under the full light of the moon. Should the bond prove true, Cade's claim to leadership will be fully restored. Should it fail, however, leadership will remain with Silas until another suitable claim arises." Silas's expression twisted with poorly concealed satisfaction as the elders dismissed the gathering, promising further instruction regarding the ceremony's requirements the following morning. As the crowd began dispersing, Silas approached Cade and Elena one final time, his voice dropping low enough that only they could hear his final warning. "Enjoy this small victory while it lasts, cousin," he murmured coldly. "The binding ceremony carries risks few outsiders fully understand. I would not be so quick to celebrate just yet." With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Elena's earlier confidence shaken slightly by the ominous warning. Cade's jaw tightened as he watched his cousin retreat, clearly troubled by the implied threat. "What did he mean?" Elena asked quietly, once they were finally alone in the small guest quarters provided for their stay. "What risks?" Cade's expression remained grim. "The binding ceremony is not without danger," he admitted reluctantly. "It requires both parties to fully open themselves to one another, magically and emotionally, in a way that leaves both extremely vulnerable throughout the process. Should anything interfere at the wrong moment, the consequences could be severe." Elena's stomach twisted with renewed anxiety. "Are you saying Silas might try something during the ceremony itself?" she asked. "I would not put it past him," Cade admitted grimly. "He has spent centuries securing his position through whatever means necessary. He will not relinquish that power without attempting every possible sabotage available to him." Despite the fear coiling tightly within her chest, Elena felt a steady resolve settle over her once more. "We have come too far to turn back now," she said firmly. "Whatever risks the ceremony holds, I am prepared to face them, Cade. I trust you, and I trust what we have built between us." Cade's expression softened considerably, gratitude and quiet admiration flickering behind his amber eyes. He reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands, his touch tender despite the obvious strength contained within him. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he murmured softly, "know that meeting you remains the single greatest gift centuries of imprisonment could never diminish." Elena leaned into his touch, drawing strength from the quiet certainty in his voice. Outside their small quarters, the packlands settled into an uneasy nighttime silence, filled with the distant sounds of a world preparing itself for whatever the following evening's ceremony might ultimately reveal. Neither of them slept easily that night, both acutely aware that tomorrow would determine not only Cade's rightful place among his people, but the true depth of a bond forged through years of quiet, unconditional love. Morning arrived with a heavy mist settling low across the packlands, curling between ancient trees like something alive and watchful. Elena woke early, unable to shake the restless energy coiled tightly beneath her skin, and found Cade already awake, seated near the small window of their guest quarters, studying the grounds outside with quiet intensity. "Could not sleep either," she said softly, moving to sit beside him. Cade turned toward her, offering a faint, tired smile. "Too much weighing on my mind," he admitted. "I keep thinking through every possible way Silas might attempt to interfere with tonight's ceremony." A soft knock interrupted their quiet conversation, and Ivy entered a moment later, carrying a small tray of simple breakfast items alongside a folded piece of parchment detailing the ceremony's requirements. Her expression carried a seriousness Elena had not seen from her before. "The elders sent instructions," Ivy explained, setting the tray down carefully. "The ceremony will take place at the ancient stone circle, deep within the forest, beginning precisely as the moon reaches its highest point. Both of you must arrive separately, entering the circle from opposite directions, meeting only once the ritual formally begins. Elena studied the parchment carefully, absorbing the detailed instructions with growing unease. Separately, she repeated. Why separately? It is tradition, Ivy explained, meant to demonstrate that both parties choose the bond freely, without influence from the other, in those final moments before commitment. It also, unfortunately, creates an opportunity for interference, should someone wish to prevent one party from reaching the circle at all. Cade's expression darkened considerably. Silas, he said grimly. Ivy nodded reluctantly. I do not have proof of any specific plan, she admitted, but I would be foolish to assume he intends to simply accept defeat gracefully. I recommend extra caution throughout the day, particularly as evening approaches. The hours that followed passed with agonizing slowness, tension steadily building as the sun climbed higher before beginning its gradual descent toward evening. Elena spent much of the day with Ivy, reviewing every detail of the ceremony until the instructions felt firmly memorized, while Cade met briefly with several pack members who had quietly expressed support for his return, gathering what allies he could before the crucial evening ahead. During a brief moment alone, Elena wandered the estate grounds, drawn toward a quiet garden tucked behind the main hall, filled with unfamiliar flowers that seemed to glow faintly beneath the afternoon sun. She sat on a stone bench, allowing herself a rare moment of stillness amid the overwhelming chaos of the past several days. A soft rustle nearby drew her attention, and she turned to find an elderly woman approaching slowly, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, her sharp eyes studying Elena with quiet curiosity. Elena recognized her immediately as one of the elders from the previous evening's council. "May I join you?" the elder asked politely. Elena nodded, shifting slightly to make room on the small bench. "Of course," she said. The elder settled beside her with a soft sigh, studying the garden's quiet beauty for a long moment before finally speaking again. "You are frightened," she observed gently. "That is understandable, given everything unfolding around you so quickly." "I have never faced anything like this before," Elena admitted honestly. "I do not fully understand your world, your customs, any of it. I am simply trying to hold on to what I know is true in my heart." The elder's expression softened with quiet approval. "That, dear child, is precisely why several among the council already believe your bond with Cade holds genuine merit," she said. "Silas surrounds himself with confidence and calculated strength, yet beneath it lies nothing but fear and ambition. You, meanwhile, carry uncertainty honestly, tempered by genuine courage. That distinction matters more than you realize." Elena felt a small measure of comfort settle over her at the elder's words. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." The elder patted her hand gently before rising slowly to her feet. "Trust yourself tonight," she said. "Whatever doubts Silas attempts to plant within your mind, remember the truth you already carry. It brought Cade back from centuries of imprisonment. It will not fail you now." As evening finally approached, Elena prepared quietly within her guest quarters, dressing in simple, elegant attire provided by the pack for the occasion. Ivy helped arrange her hair, offering quiet reassurance despite the nervous energy radiating between them both. "You are ready," Ivy said finally, studying Elena's reflection in the small mirror. "More ready than you realize." As the moon began its slow ascent into the darkening sky, Elena made her way toward the forest path leading to the ancient stone circle, accompanied by 2 silent pack members assigned to escort her safely to the ceremony. The forest grew steadily darker and more silent with each step, the usual sounds of nocturnal wildlife strangely absent, replaced instead by an unsettling stillness that made Elena's skin prickle with unease. Halfway along the path, one of her escorts suddenly stumbled, letting out a sharp gasp before collapsing entirely to the ground. Elena spun around in alarm, only to find the second escort similarly struggling, clutching at his throat as though some invisible force had suddenly gripped him. Before Elena could react further, A cold, unnatural mist began curling around her ankles, rising steadily higher, carrying with it a faint, unpleasant scent that made her head spin dizzily. She recognized, with sudden dawning horror, exactly what was happening. "Silas," she gasped, stumbling backward as the mist thickened rapidly around her. A soft, mocking laugh echoed from somewhere within the surrounding trees, though Elena could not immediately locate its source. "You are quicker than I expected," a familiar voice called out coldly, "though I doubt that will save you tonight." Elena's vision blurred dangerously as the mist continued rising, her limbs growing heavy and uncoordinated despite her best efforts to keep moving forward. She fought desperately against the encroaching darkness threatening to overtake her, thinking of Cade waiting for her at the stone circle, of everything they had already overcome together. "I will not fail him," she thought fiercely, forcing herself forward despite her rapidly weakening legs. Not now, not after everything. With tremendous effort, Elena stumbled through the thickening mist, following the faint sound of distant chanting that marked the direction of the stone circle. Behind her, Silas's mocking laughter continued echoing through the trees, though he made no further move to physically stop her, seemingly content to let the disorienting mist accomplish his goals instead. Just as her vision began fading entirely toward darkness, Elena broke through the tree line, stumbling directly into the moonlit clearing where the ancient stone circle stood waiting. Cade, already present within the circle, turned sharply at her sudden, unsteady arrival, his expression shifting instantly from anticipation to alarm. "Elena," he called out urgently, rushing forward despite the ceremony's strict boundaries regarding separate entry. "I am here," Elena managed weakly, forcing herself to remain upright despite the lingering effects of Silas's magical interference. "I made it." Cade caught her gently as her legs finally gave way beneath her, lowering her carefully within the boundary of the ancient stones. Around them, several elders gathered nearby gasped audibly, clearly recognizing the unmistakable signs of magical sabotage. "This is precisely the interference I warned against," the eldest elder declared sharply, her sharp gaze scanning the surrounding tree line with obvious fury. "Silas, show yourself immediately." A tense silence followed before Silas finally emerged from the shadows, his expression carefully composed despite the obvious accusation hanging heavily in the air. "I have no idea what you are referring to," he said smoothly. "Perhaps the human woman simply lacks the stamina for such an important ceremony." Elena, still fighting through the lingering fog clouding her mind, forced herself upright with Cade's steady support. "I made it here," she said firmly, her voice growing stronger with each passing moment. "Nothing you did stopped me, Silas." The elders exchanged grave, knowing glances, clearly unconvinced by Silas's denial despite lacking definitive proof of his interference. The eldest elder finally spoke again, her tone carrying unmistakable authority. "We will address this matter fully following tonight's ceremony," she declared firmly. "For now, given the clear attempt at sabotage, the ceremony will proceed as originally planned. Cade, Elena, are you both still prepared to continue?" Cade turned toward Elena, his expression filled with quiet concern despite the fierce determination burning steadily within his amber eyes. "Are you able to continue?" he asked softly. "No one would blame you for needing more time." Elena met his gaze steadily, drawing strength from the deep well of resolve that had carried her this far already. "I am ready," she said firmly. "Let us finish what we started." As the moon reached its highest point overhead, casting silver light across the ancient stone circle, Elena and Cade turned to face one another fully, prepared finally to begin the sacred binding ceremony that would determine not only Cade's rightful place among his people, but the true, unbreakable strength of the bond they had built together against every possible obstacle standing in their way. The eldest elder stepped forward slowly, raising both hands toward the moonlit sky before addressing the gathered witnesses in a clear, steady voice that carried easily across the silent clearing. "Let it be known," she declared, "that the binding ceremony now begins, witnessed fully by this council, under the light of the full moon, as tradition demands. Elena felt her heart pounding fiercely within her chest as Cade reached for both her hands, his amber eyes steady and warm despite the tension still lingering from Silas's earlier interference. Around them, the ancient stones seemed to hum faintly with quiet energy, as though awakening after centuries of dormant waiting. "Repeat after me," the elder instructed gently, before beginning the ancient words of the binding ritual, spoken in a language Elena did not recognize but somehow understood instinctively as the words left her lips, guided by some deep, instinctive knowledge she could not fully explain. As the ritual progressed, Elena felt a strange warmth begin spreading through her chest, radiating outward from where her hands remained clasped tightly within Cade's own. The warmth grew steadily stronger, building into something that felt simultaneously overwhelming and comforting, like finally coming home after years of feeling perpetually lost. Through her fading disorientation from Silas's earlier attack, Elena felt something shift deep within her, a connection forming that went beyond simple words or ceremony, a genuine merging of hearts that felt as natural and inevitable as breathing. She could sense, faintly, echoes of Cade's own emotions, his relief, his gratitude, his fierce, protective love, all flowing steadily into her own awareness. Cade's expression mirrored the wonder clearly reflected in Elena's own eyes as the bond continued strengthening between them, the ancient stones around them beginning to glow faintly with soft, golden light that intensified with each passing moment. The gathered witnesses watched in hushed silence, clearly recognizing the unmistakable signs of a genuine, powerful bond forming before them. Just as the ceremony approached its final, crucial moment, a sudden disturbance erupted at the edge of the clearing. Silas, his earlier composed facade finally shattering into open desperation, lunged forward with a sharp cry, clearly intent on physically disrupting the ceremony before it could reach completion. "Stop this immediately!" he snarled, his eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "This bond is false, manufactured through desperation rather than genuine truth." Several pack guards moved quickly to intercept him, but Silas shifted mid-stride, his human form dissolving rapidly into that of a large, dark-furred wolf, snarling fiercely as he broke free from the guard's attempted restraint. Panic rippled through the gathered crowd as Silas charged directly toward the stone circle, clearly intent on physically severing the bond forming between Cade and Elena. Cade reacted instantly, releasing Elena's hands only long enough to position himself protectively between her and his charging cousin, his own form shifting rapidly into a powerful wolf, larger and more commanding than Silas's own, silver fur catching the moonlight as he met his cousin's charge head-on. The two wolves collided with tremendous force, their combined momentum sending both tumbling several feet outside the boundary of the ancient stone circle. Elena watched in horror as they grappled fiercely, snarling and snapping, the raw power of their combined strength shaking the very ground beneath them. Elena felt the fading remnants of Silas's earlier magical interference finally clear entirely from her mind, replaced instead by a fierce, protective clarity she had never experienced before. Without fully understanding the impulse driving her, she stepped forward toward the edge of the fighting wolves, raising her voice with unexpected authority. "Cade!" she called out firmly, her voice somehow cutting clearly through the chaos of the fight. "Finish this. I trust you completely." Something shifted immediately in the intensity of Cade's movements, as though her words had granted him renewed strength and focus. With a powerful, decisive lunge, he finally overpowered his cousin, pinning Silas firmly beneath him, his jaws positioned dangerously close to Silas's exposed throat. The clearing fell into tense, breathless silence as everyone present waited to see whether Cade would deliver a final, decisive blow. Instead, after a long, charged moment, Cade slowly released his hold, stepping back deliberately as he shifted back into human form, his expression carrying quiet, controlled authority rather than vengeful fury. "I will not become the kind of leader who rules through needless cruelty," Cade declared firmly, addressing not only the defeated Silas, but the entire gathered assembly. "That was always your chosen path, cousin, never mine." Silas, still trapped in wolf form, whimpered softly before finally shifting back into his human shape, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by something closer to genuine defeat. The eldest elder stepped forward immediately, her expression stern as she addressed the fallen challenger directly. "Silas, your actions here tonight confirm every suspicion this council has harbored for years regarding your unfit character for leadership," she declared firmly. "You will be stripped of all remaining authority within this pack, effective immediately, and placed under strict supervision until further judgment can be determined." As pack guards moved forward to escort Silas away, Cade turned back toward Elena, his expression softening considerably despite the lingering tension from the intense confrontation. He crossed the clearing quickly, reaching for her hands once more, concern evident in his gaze as he studied her carefully for any lingering signs of harm. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Elena nodded, though her legs still trembled slightly from the overwhelming events of the evening. "I am," she said. "Better than all right, actually. I felt you, Cade. During the ceremony, I felt everything." Cade's expression filled with quiet wonder and profound relief. "As did I," he admitted softly. "The bond is complete, Elena. Fully and truly complete." The eldest elder approached once more, her expression now warm with genuine approval rather than the cautious neutrality she had maintained throughout the earlier proceedings. "The council formally recognizes this bond as true and unbreakable," she declared, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing for all gathered witnesses to hear. "Cade, your claim to leadership stands fully restored, effective immediately." A cheer erupted from the gathered crowd, considerably more enthusiastic now that Silas's true character had been fully exposed before them all. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched Cade accept the congratulations of pack members who approached eagerly, many expressing genuine relief at his long-awaited return. Amid the celebration, Ivy approached with a warm, genuine smile, embracing Elena briefly. "You did wonderfully," she said. "I do not think anyone doubted the truth of your bond after tonight." Elena laughed softly, still processing the overwhelming events of the past several hours. "I could not have done any of it without everyone's help," she admitted, "especially yours." As the celebration continued late into the night, Cade eventually pulled Elena gently aside, leading her toward a quiet corner of the clearing, away from the enthusiastic crowd still celebrating his restored leadership. He studied her carefully beneath the soft moonlight, his expression filled with quiet, overwhelming gratitude. "You risked everything tonight," he said softly. "For me. For a bond that began with nothing more than kindness, shown toward a piece of cursed wood." Elena reached up, gently cupping his face in her hands. "I would do it again without hesitation," she said firmly. "You are worth every risk, Cade." "I have known that since long before you ever opened your eyes." Cade leaned forward slowly, pressing a gentle, lingering kiss against her forehead, his relief and affection evident in every careful movement. "Whatever challenges remain ahead," he murmured softly, "we will face them exactly as we faced tonight, together, without hesitation." Overhead, the full moon continued casting its silver light across the ancient stone circle, illuminating the beginning of a partnership that had already proven strong enough to overcome centuries-old curses, ancient traditions, and the desperate schemes of a bitter rival, standing now as an unbreakable foundation for whatever future still awaited them both. The days following the ceremony passed in a whirlwind of unfamiliar responsibility for Elena, as she found herself increasingly drawn into the daily operations of a pack she was still learning to fully understand. Cade, now formally recognized as Alpha, spent long hours meeting with various pack members, working to repair the fractured trust that Silas's cruel leadership had left scattered throughout the community. Elena watched him move through these challenges with quiet admiration, noting the careful patience he extended toward even the most skeptical pack members, those who had grown accustomed to Silas's harsh methods and remained uncertain whether genuine change was truly possible. She found herself increasingly stepping into a supportive role during these meetings, offering an outsider's perspective that occasionally helped bridge understanding between Cade and those still hesitant to trust him fully. "You have a gift for this," Cade observed one evening, as they finally retired to their private quarters following another lengthy day of meetings. "People trust you almost instinctively, even those who remain wary of me." Elena smiled tiredly, settling into a comfortable chair near the small fireplace crackling softly nearby. "Perhaps because I understand what it feels like to be an outsider looking in," she suggested. "I know how much a little patience and kindness can mean to someone who has spent too long feeling unseen." Cade's expression softened with quiet affection as he moved to sit beside her, gently taking her hand in his. "You continue surprising me," he admitted. "Even after everything, I did not expect you to adapt so gracefully to a world so completely different from your own." "I did not expect it either," Elena admitted honestly. "But somehow, being here with you, it feels less overwhelming than I imagined it would." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a soft knock at the door, followed by Ivy's familiar voice requesting entry. She stepped inside, her expression carrying a seriousness that immediately drew both Cade and Elena's full attention. "I apologize for the late intrusion," she said quickly, "but I felt this could not wait until morning. There is news regarding Silas." Cade's posture straightened immediately, his earlier relaxed demeanor replaced by sharp, focused attention. "What news?" he asked. Ivy hesitated briefly before continuing. "He escaped his confinement earlier this evening," she admitted. "The guards discovered his empty quarters less than an hour ago. We believe he fled into the surrounding forest, though his current whereabouts remain unknown." Elena felt a fresh wave of anxiety wash over her at the news, memories of Silas's cold, calculating menace still fresh in her mind. "Do you believe he intends further action against us?" she asked. Cade's jaw tightened with quiet resolve. "Given everything we already know of his character, I would be foolish to assume otherwise," he said grimly. "We must increase security immediately, particularly around the perimeter of the estate." Over the following days, search parties combed the surrounding forests extensively, though Silas remained frustratingly elusive, seemingly vanishing entirely despite the pack's considerable tracking abilities. The uncertainty weighed heavily over the estate, casting a persistent shadow over what should have otherwise been a period of celebration and healing following Cade's restored leadership. Elena found herself growing increasingly restless during this tense period, torn between wanting to remain close to Cade for safety and feeling the pull of responsibilities still waiting back in her small hometown, where her shop remained closed and Mara's persistent questions continued piling up through increasingly worried messages. "I need to return home soon," she admitted to Cade one evening, as they walked slowly through the quiet estate gardens, drawing what small comfort they could from a rare moment of peace amid the ongoing tension. "My shop cannot remain closed indefinitely, and Mara deserves some explanation, even if I cannot share everything." Cade's expression carried visible reluctance, though he nodded slowly, understanding the necessity behind her words. "I do not like the idea of you traveling while Silas remains at large," he admitted. "But I understand your responsibilities cannot simply be abandoned indefinitely." "Perhaps," Elena suggested carefully, "you could accompany me, at least for a little while. Surely the pack can manage under Ivy's guidance for a short period, and it might offer you a chance to see the ordinary world I come from more fully, beyond the chaos of these past several weeks." Cade considered her suggestion thoughtfully. "It might also offer Silas an opportunity to strike while my attention remains divided," he pointed out. "Or," Elena countered gently, "it might simply buy us both a small measure of peace, somewhere Silas would not necessarily think to search immediately. We have faced enough danger these past weeks, Cade. I think we deserve at least a brief reprieve." After discussing the matter further with Ivy and several trusted pack members, arrangements were finally made for Cade and Elena to return temporarily to her small hometown, accompanied discreetly by a small security detail to ensure their continued safety. Ivy would remain behind, managing pack affairs alongside several trusted elders until Cade's eventual return. The journey back felt strangely surreal, retracing the same winding forest roads that had carried them toward such an extraordinary, dangerous adventure only weeks earlier. Elena found herself studying Cade's expression as familiar landmarks began appearing, curious how the quiet, ordinary world she called home might appear through his eyes after everything he had already experienced. "It is smaller than I remembered feeling," she admitted as they finally approached the outskirts of town, "though I suppose everything feels different after everything that has happened." Cade reached over, gently squeezing her hand. "It feels peaceful," he offered warmly. "After the chaos of recent weeks, peaceful sounds rather wonderful." As they finally pulled up outside Elena's small shop, the familiar sight of the darkened windows and closed sign brought an unexpected wave of emotion crashing over her. Relief mixed with lingering uncertainty about how she might explain her extended absence to curious neighbors and an increasingly worried cousin. Almost immediately, the shop's front door swung open, revealing Mara standing there, arms crossed, relief and obvious frustration warring clearly across her expression. "Elena Voss," she said sharply, though her voice carried unmistakable relief beneath the exasperation. "You have exactly 5 seconds to explain where you have been, before I call the entire police department." Elena managed a tired but genuine smile despite the exhaustion of recent weeks. "It is a very long story," she admitted. "But I promise, Mara, I will tell you everything I possibly can." Mara's gaze shifted toward Cade, studying him carefully before her expression softened slightly. "You had better," she said firmly. "Both of you. Starting now." As they settled into Elena's small kitchen, sharing tea while Elena carefully navigated which portions of the truth felt safe to reveal, Cade watched quietly, clearly recognizing the deep bond of loyalty and love shared between the two cousins despite their occasional teasing and frustration. It reminded him, he realized, of exactly the kind of genuine connection he hoped to help rebuild within his own fractured pack. Despite the lingering uncertainty surrounding Silas's whereabouts, despite the enormous responsibilities still awaiting Cade's return to pack leadership, Elena felt a small, steady measure of peace settle over her, as she sat surrounded by the familiar comfort of her small kitchen, her cousin's teasing laughter, and Cade's warm, steady presence beside her. Whatever challenges still remained ahead, she felt increasingly confident that together they possessed exactly the kind of strength required to face them. Word of Elena's mysterious houseguest spread even further through town during the following days, curiosity intensifying rather than fading despite her best efforts to maintain the simple explanation of a distant relative visiting temporarily. Elena found herself fielding an endless stream of questions from neighbors, shopkeepers, and even the elderly women from church, who suddenly seemed far more interested in striking up friendly conversation than they had ever been before. "It seems your reputation has shifted rather dramatically," Cade observed one afternoon, watching with quiet amusement, as Elena finally closed the shop door behind yet another curious neighbor, who had stopped by under the thin pretense of needing an antique appraised. Elena laughed, shaking her head as she returned to her workbench. "From the Nutcracker bride to apparently landing the most eligible bachelor this town has ever seen," she said dryly. "Small towns really do love their gossip." Despite the constant curiosity, their days settled into a comfortable, peaceful rhythm that felt like a welcome reprieve after the intensity of recent weeks. Cade spent considerable time exploring the modern conveniences of Elena's world, growing increasingly comfortable with everything from grocery shopping to the strange, wonderful convenience of streaming films late into the evening, curled together on Elena's small couch. Yet beneath the surface, peace. The lingering uncertainty surrounding Silas's whereabouts remained a constant, quiet tension, neither of them fully addressed, though Elena occasionally caught Cade's gaze drifting toward the windows during quiet moments, his enhanced senses clearly remaining alert despite his outward calm. One evening, nearly 2 weeks into their stay, Elena's phone buzzed with an urgent call from Ivy, her voice tight with barely controlled alarm as Elena answered on speaker, allowing Cade to listen alongside her. "We found him," Ivy said quickly. "Silas. He has been gathering support among several disgruntled pack members who never fully accepted your leadership, Cade. Our scouts confirmed movement toward your location just this morning. We believe he intends to strike directly rather than risk further confrontation on pack lands where his support remains limited." Cade's expression hardened immediately, every trace of his earlier relaxed demeanor vanishing entirely. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "Perhaps a day," Ivy estimated. "Possibly less. I am sending reinforcements immediately, but they will not arrive before tomorrow evening at the earliest." After ending the call, a heavy silence settled over the small kitchen as Elena processed the sudden shift from peaceful reprieve back into immediate danger. "I suppose our brief peace was always going to be temporary," she said quietly. Cade reached for her hand, his expression grave but resolute. "I will not allow him to hurt you," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, Elena, that remains my absolute priority." "We face this together," Elena reminded him gently. "Exactly as we agreed from the very beginning." They spent the remainder of the evening preparing as carefully as possible, reinforcing the shop's entrances, alerting the small security detail that had remained quietly stationed nearby throughout their stay, and reaching out cautiously to Mara, who insisted immediately on coming to stay with them despite Elena's attempts to keep her safely uninvolved. "If something dangerous is happening," Mara said firmly, arriving at the shop later that evening with a determined expression that brooked no argument, "then you are not facing it without me. We are family, Elena. That has not changed, regardless of how strange this situation has become." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes at her cousin's fierce loyalty, embracing her tightly despite the tension coiling anxiously through her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. As night finally fell, an unnatural stillness settled over the quiet street outside the shop, the usual sounds of evening traffic and distant conversation strangely absent. Cade paced slowly near the windows, his enhanced senses clearly straining against the silence, searching for any sign of the approaching threat. "They are close," he finally said, his voice low and tense. "I can feel it." Moments later, the shop's front window shattered inward with sudden, violent force, and several dark shapes surged through the opening before anyone could fully react. Elena screamed, stumbling backward as Cade immediately shifted forms, positioning himself protectively between the intruders and both Elena and Mara. Silas emerged from the chaos, his expression carrying none of his earlier calculated composure, replaced instead by open, desperate fury. "You cost me everything, cousin," he snarled, his own form beginning to shift as he prepared for direct confrontation. "I intend to reclaim what should have always been mine." The small shop erupted into chaotic conflict as Cade's security detail rushed to intercept Silas's accompanying forces, the confined space making the confrontation dangerously close and immediate. Elena grabbed Mara's arm, pulling her toward the relative safety of the back room, though her attention remained fixed anxiously on Cade as he faced his cousin directly amid the surrounding chaos. "We need to get out of here," Mara said urgently, though her voice carried obvious fear rather than panic, a steady resolve remaining despite the overwhelming circumstances. "Not without Cade," Elena said firmly, refusing to abandon him despite the very real danger surrounding them. The confrontation between Cade and Silas grew increasingly intense, both wolves circling each other with fierce, calculated precision, years of pent-up resentment and desperate ambition fueling Silas's attacks with dangerous, unpredictable ferocity. Elena watched in terrified fascination as Cade fought with steady, controlled strength, clearly drawing upon reserves of strength and determination that Silas's desperate rage could not match. Just as the confrontation reached its most intense peak, Elena noticed movement near the shattered front window, one of Silas's remaining allies attempting to circle around behind Cade during his focused confrontation with his cousin. Without fully thinking through the danger, Elena grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from a nearby shelf, moving quickly to intercept the approaching threat. The startled attacker turned just in time to receive a solid blow from Elena's improvised weapon, stumbling backward with a pained yelp before Cade's remaining security detail quickly moved to subdue him fully. Elena's heart pounded fiercely from the sudden burst of adrenaline, though she felt a fierce, protective satisfaction at having successfully defended against the threat. Cade, momentarily distracted by Elena's unexpected intervention, glanced briefly in her direction, an action Silas immediately capitalized upon, lunging forward with renewed, desperate aggression. Cade barely managed to avoid the worst of the attack, though Elena watched in horror as Silas's claws caught across his shoulder, drawing an immediate, visible line of blood. "No!" Elena cried out, though her fear quickly transformed into fierce determination rather than helpless panic. Cade, despite the fresh injury, refused to yield, drawing upon renewed strength as he finally overpowered his cousin once more, pinning him firmly against the shattered remains of Elena's front counter. This time, there would be no mercy extended toward further chances, the security detail moving quickly to properly restrain Silas before he could attempt any further escape or aggression. As the chaos finally began settling, Cade shifted back into human form, immediately turning his attention toward Elena, his expression filled with fierce, protective concern despite his own visible injury. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, closing the distance between them quickly. "I am fine," Elena assured him, though her hands trembled slightly from the overwhelming adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "You are bleeding, Cade. It will heal quickly," he assured her, though he allowed her to examine the wound carefully regardless, appreciating her obvious concern despite his own dismissive reassurance. As Silas was finally secured and prepared for transport back to Packlands under considerably more stringent confinement, Mara emerged cautiously from the back room, her expression a mixture of lingering shock and grudging admiration as she surveyed the chaotic aftermath scattered throughout the small shop. "I really do have questions now," she said finally, her voice carrying a slightly unsteady laugh despite the obvious tension still lingering in the room. Elena managed a tired, relieved smile despite the exhaustion weighing heavily over her. "I promise," she said. "I will explain everything, Mara, all of it." As dawn began breaking over the quiet town, illuminating the damage scattered throughout Elena's small shop, she felt a profound sense of relief settle over her, despite the chaos of the night's events. Whatever remained ahead, Silas's threat finally felt genuinely neutralized, leaving space at last for the peaceful future she had begun daring to imagine alongside Cade. 3 weeks passed before life finally began settling into something resembling a genuine, lasting peace. Silas remained under permanent, heavily guarded confinement within the Packlands, stripped completely of any remaining influence or authority, his desperate final attempt at reclaiming power having thoroughly convinced even his most stubborn remaining sympathizers that Cade's leadership represented the far wiser, more stable path forward. Elena's shop, though still bearing minor repairs from the chaotic confrontation, gradually returned to its familiar rhythm, customers filtering back through the door with a curiosity that had shifted entirely from mockery toward genuine fascination and respect. The story of what exactly had transpired remained carefully vague to most of the town, though Mara, now fully informed of the extraordinary truth behind Cade's mysterious arrival, had become one of Elena's most fierce and loyal supporters throughout the transition. "I still cannot quite believe I have a werewolf king for a cousin-in-law," Mara joked one afternoon, helping Elena carefully reorganize the shop's newly repaired front counter. "Though I suppose it does explain why you always seem to prefer wooden company over actual dating prospects." Elena laughed, swatting playfully at her cousin's arm. "In my defense," she said, "that wooden company turned out considerably better than every single date you ever tried setting me up with over the years." Mara grinned, unable to argue against that particular point. "Fair enough," she conceded, "though I fully expect an invitation to whatever royal wedding presumably comes next." Elena felt her cheeks warm slightly at the teasing suggestion, though her heart fluttered with quiet hope at the thought. Cade had not yet formally proposed anything beyond their already established bond, though the deepening warmth and commitment between them had grown steadily more apparent with each passing day. That evening, Cade returned from another lengthy visit to the Packlands, where he had been working diligently alongside Ivy and the Council of Elders to rebuild trust and stability following the turmoil of recent weeks. Elena greeted him warmly at the shop's back entrance, immediately noticing the unusually thoughtful expression carried across his handsome features. "Everything all right?" she asked, studying him carefully. Cade nodded, though his expression remained contemplative as he settled beside her at the small kitchen table. "The pack continues healing steadily," he said. "Ivy has proven herself an exceptional advisor throughout this transition. I believe in time, the wounds Silas caused will fully mend." "That is wonderful news," Elena said warmly, though she sensed there remained something further weighing on his mind. "Is something else troubling you?" Cade reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his own, his amber eyes carrying a warmth and sincerity that immediately eased any lingering worry within her. "Not troubling me," he clarified softly. "Rather, I have been considering our future rather extensively during these recent weeks apart." Elena's heart began beating a little faster, anticipation building steadily as Cade continued speaking, his voice carrying a rare vulnerability beneath its usual steady confidence. "I understand you have built an entire life here," he continued carefully. "Your shop, your cousin, everything familiar and comforting to you. Yet my responsibilities increasingly require my presence among the pack. I find myself uncertain how best to honor both your world and mine, without asking you to sacrifice everything that makes you who you are." Elena considered his words thoughtfully, recognizing the genuine concern and respect underlying his hesitation. "What if," she suggested slowly, "we did not have to choose entirely between one world or the other? What if we found a way to build something new instead, drawing from both?" Cade studied her curiously, clearly intrigued by the suggestion. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I could maintain my shop here, perhaps visiting more selectively rather than daily," Elena explained, warming to the idea as she spoke it aloud. "And I could spend increasing time alongside you at the Packlands, learning more fully how to support your leadership there. It would not need to be perfectly balanced immediately, but perhaps, over time, we could build something that honors both parts of who we each are." Cade's expression softened considerably, admiration and quiet love shining clearly behind his amber gaze. "You continue amazing me," he said softly, "always finding solutions I had not fully considered myself." Elena smiled warmly, squeezing his hand gently. "We make a good team," she said simply. "I think we always will." Cade rose slowly from his chair, moving to kneel beside her instead, drawing a small, carefully wrapped item from his pocket that Elena had not previously noticed. Her breath caught as he unwrapped it carefully, revealing a delicate ring crafted from what appeared to be silver, inlaid with a small, warm amber stone that caught the evening light beautifully. "This belonged to my mother," he explained softly, "before this ancient world nearly forgot my name entirely. I have carried it safely all these centuries, waiting, I now realize, for exactly the right person to finally receive it." Elena felt tears well in her eyes as Cade continued, his voice steady despite the obvious emotion carried within it. "Elena Voss," he said softly, "you loved me faithfully when I existed only as broken, cursed wood. You defended me fiercely when danger threatened everything we had only just begun building together. I cannot imagine facing whatever remains ahead without you steadily beside me. Will you accept this ring and everything it represents as my chosen mate, fully and completely, for whatever future still awaits us?" Elena, overwhelmed with joy and quiet, steady certainty, nodded immediately, extending her hand toward him without hesitation. "Yes," she said softly, her voice thick with happy tears. "Absolutely, completely yes." Cade slipped the ring carefully onto her finger, the amber stone catching the warm evening light beautifully as he rose to draw her into a gentle, loving embrace. Elena melted into his arms, feeling the steady, comforting warmth of a bond that had begun through simple, unconditional kindness and had grown, against every impossible odds, into something truly extraordinary. In the months that followed, Elena gradually built the balanced life she had envisioned, splitting her time thoughtfully between her beloved shop and increasing involvement alongside Cade at the Packlands. The town gradually adjusted to her occasional absences, the earlier mocking whispers about the Nutcracker bride transforming slowly into fond, admiring stories told proudly to visiting relatives about the quiet, kind-hearted woman who had somehow found her fairy tale ending in the most unexpected way imaginable. Mara visited frequently, growing increasingly close with Ivy during these visits, their friendship blossoming steadily alongside the deepening bond between their respective cousins. Even the elderly women from church, once so quick with their mocking judgments, now greeted Elena with genuine warmth and curiosity whenever she passed through town. On a warm afternoon, nearly a year after that fateful, stormy night, when a broken Nutcracker had first revealed the extraordinary man hidden within, Elena stood once more in her small workshop, gently dusting the small collection of restored wooden pieces still displayed proudly on her shelves. Cade entered quietly behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist as he pressed a soft kiss against her temple. "Any regrets?" he murmured softly. "About everything that led us here." Elena leaned back contentedly against him, smiling as she considered the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. "Not a single one," she said softly. "Everyone mocked me once for loving something the rest of the world dismissed as foolish. Now that same love stands as the truest, strongest thing I have ever known." Outside, the late afternoon sun spilled warmly through the shop windows, illuminating the quiet, peaceful life they had built together, proof beyond any doubt that even the smallest, most overlooked acts of genuine kindness could ultimately grow into something powerful enough to break any curse, defeat any enemy, and build an entirely new, extraordinary future neither of them could have ever imagined possible. And so, in the quiet corners of a small town that once knew her only as the girl who loved her Nutcracker too much, Elena Voss finally found her happily ever after, standing steadily beside the Alpha King she had loved faithfully long before the rest of the world ever understood why.